I discovered my husband of 10 years isn't who I thought he was, but the truth is worse than the lie. I found my husband's second phone hidden in his car at 2 a.m. 3 years of texts, photos, and conversations with a woman named Claire. When I confronted him, he said something that made me realize our entire 10-year marriage was built on a lie. But here's the twist. When I finally uncovered what was really going on, I realized I was the villain in someone else's story. My name is Catherine. I'm 35 years old, and I need you to think about something as you listen to this story. Have you ever found out something about someone you love that made you question everything you thought you knew about them? How far would you go to protect the life you've built? Let me know in the comments because I'm genuinely curious. I've been married to David for 10 years. We met in college, fell in love quickly, got married at 25, and built what I thought was a solid partnership. We had a nice house in the suburbs, good jobs. I'm a marketing director. He's a software engineer. And we seemed happy. Not perfect, but happy. We'd have the occasional argument, but what couple doesn't? David was always a bit withdrawn. He kept his phone on him constantly. He'd sometimes stay late at work, sometimes be short with me about his day. But I figured that was just who he was. He wasn't the most emotionally expressive person, but I told myself that was okay. We all have our quirks. Then came the night everything changed. I was looking for something in his car, a charger I thought I'd left in there, and I found it. A second phone, an iPhone tucked into the side pocket of his door, hidden behind some papers. My stomach dropped immediately. Who has a second phone unless they're hiding something? I should have put it back. I should have confronted him directly. I should have trusted my husband enough to ask him first. But I didn't. I opened it. What I found shattered me. 3 years of messages with someone named Claire. Not just messages, intimate messages, photos of them together, plans to meet up, text conversations that showed an entire relationship I knew nothing about. And the messages weren't recent. They spanned from year 7 to year 10 of our marriage. He'd been doing this for 3 years. 3 years. While I was planning vacations with him, while I was telling my friends how lucky I was, while I was thinking about whether we should try for kids. 3 years of lies. I sat in that car for probably an hour just scrolling through the messages, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand how the man I'd built my entire adult life with could do this. The betrayal was crushing. It felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. I went inside and confronted him. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just showed him the phone and asked, "Who is Claire?" His face went white. And then something interesting happened. Instead of lying, instead of making excuses, he sat down and he told me the truth. Not about the affair, but about something else entirely. David told me something that night that made me realize I'd been living in a complete fantasy. He said, "Catherine, I'm not having an affair with Claire. I'm in love with Claire. I have been for 3 years. But she's not a woman. She's a person. She goes by Claire now, and she's transitioning. And I've been helping her through this process in secret because I knew you wouldn't understand." I stood there staring at him, trying to process what he was saying. In love with Claire. This wasn't about infidelity in the traditional sense. This was about something else entirely. Something that reframed everything, he continued. "I know how you talk about trans people. I know the comments you make. I know what you said about your cousin being transgender. And I couldn't be honest with you because I was afraid. I was afraid you'd leave me. I was afraid you'd judge me. So I created a space where I could just be myself and support Claire without lying directly to your face about a relationship." I felt like I couldn't breathe. He was right. I was the kind of person who made dismissive comments about transgender people. I wasn't a horrible person. I didn't hate anyone. But I definitely had biases. I definitely said things that, looking back, were ignorant and hurtful. But this was my husband. My marriage was being destroyed by a lie. Did his reasoning matter? Did his fear justify 3 years of deception? I asked him to leave. I told him I needed space to think. I couldn't be in the same house as him. I couldn't even look at him without feeling this crushing sense of betrayal. I called my best friend Rachel and told her everything. Her immediate response was, "He's cheating on you. That's what this is. It doesn't matter what he calls it. He's emotionally involved with another woman. You need to leave him. She was right, wasn't she? Emotional infidelity is still infidelity. The fact that Claire was transitioning didn't change the fact that David had lied to me for 3 years. It didn't change the fact that he'd hidden an entire relationship from me. But then I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I contacted Claire. I found her on social media and sent her a message. I was angry. I told her that she'd destroyed my marriage. I told her that she should be ashamed of herself for coming between a husband and wife. I made a lot of assumptions. I said things I'm not proud of. Her response changed everything. Claire agreed to meet with me at a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon. And when I saw her, I was struck by how young she looked. Maybe early 30s. And she looked nervous, like she was preparing for a confrontation she knew was coming. We sat across from each other and she said something I wasn't expecting. She said, I'm so sorry for everything. Your husband is a good man and I never wanted to hurt your marriage. I wanted to be angry, but there was something in her voice that made me listen instead. She told me her story. She'd been living a lie for her entire adult life. She was assigned male at birth, and she'd spent 30 years pretending to be someone she wasn't. She was miserable, deeply, existentially miserable. She had a wife, a family, a career, everything society says should make you happy, but she was dying inside because she was living as the wrong version of herself. When she finally started her transition, she didn't tell anyone for the first year. She was terrified. Terrified of her family's reaction, terrified of losing her job, terrified of being rejected by the people she loved. David had been her therapist. Wait, what? David is a therapist, I asked. She nodded. He's not a software engineer, Catherine. He's a therapist. Has been for 8 years. He works at a private practice. He took on my case pro bono because he knew I couldn't afford therapy while I was transitioning and coming out. The ground shifted again. David wasn't a software engineer. That was a lie. That was another lie. He'd been lying about his job for years. But as Claire continued talking, I started to understand why. David had become a therapist specifically to help people like Claire, people who were struggling with their identities, people who were going through transitions, gender, lifestyle, whatever, and needed support. But he couldn't tell me because he knew I wouldn't understand. Worse, he knew I'd judge him for it. Claire said, "Your husband spent 3 years helping me come out to my family, helping me transition, encouraging me to be honest about who I am, and I know that hurt you. I know that his secrecy felt like betrayal, but Catherine, he was trying to live his values while protecting your marriage. And that's actually kind of beautiful, even if it's also dishonest." I didn't know what to say. I was angry. I was confused. I was starting to see myself through Claire's eyes, and I didn't like what I saw. I went home and I looked at my husband differently, and I realized something devastating. I had been living with a version of him that wasn't real, but so had he. David finally told me the full truth. He'd been a therapist for 8 years. Our entire marriage, he'd been lying about his job. Why? Because when we got married, when I was still in my 20s and relatively open-minded, I'd made a comment about how therapy was for people who were weak or couldn't handle their own problems. He'd internalized that. He'd decided that his wife, the woman he loved, wouldn't respect him if he pursued his real passion. So he got a job in tech, made decent money, and became someone I could respect. But he hid his true self away. Then when he started his therapy practice on the side, when he started helping people like Claire, he couldn't tell me because he knew I'd judge not just him, but the people he was helping. He knew I'd make dismissive comments. He knew I'd minimize the struggles of transgender people. And he was right. I would have. So for 3 years, he'd been living 2 lives. One with me, where he was the emotionally distant software engineer. One at his practice and with Claire, where he was the compassionate therapist helping vulnerable people find themselves. He wasn't having an affair. He was having a crisis of conscience. He was trying to live his values while staying married to someone who didn't share those values. And eventually, the cognitive dissonance had become unbearable. But here's where the story gets really uncomfortable. Here's where I had to confront some hard truths about myself. I'd felt betrayed by my husband's lies, and rightfully so, he had lied. But I'd created an environment where he felt he couldn't tell me the truth. My judgment, my biases, my dismissive comments. They'd all contributed to him feeling like he couldn't be himself in our marriage. And then, when he found a way to live his values in secret, I was angry at him for that too. I couldn't win with me, and he couldn't win with himself. I started going to therapy, a different therapist, not David, and I had to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself. I realized that I'd created an entire identity around being a good person without actually examining my beliefs. I said I believed in acceptance, but I mocked transgender people. I said I believed in equality, but I judged my husband for wanting to help vulnerable populations. I said I believed in honesty, but I'd created a dynamic where my husband felt he couldn't be honest with me. I was the villain. Not in the way I'd initially thought. I wasn't a horrible person, but I was someone who'd built a marriage on a carefully constructed version of myself. And I'd expected the same from David. I'd wanted him to be the person I'd married, not the person he actually was. After 3 months of therapy, David and I started couples counseling. And I mean real counseling. Confronting the difficult stuff. Examining our relationship honestly. What came out was complicated. David shouldn't have lied about his job. That was wrong. Deception, even well-intentioned deception, damages trust. I understood why he did it, but understanding doesn't erase the hurt. But I also had to accept that I'd created the conditions for that deception. My judgment, my biases, my inability to accept parts of him that didn't fit into the image I'd created. We had to make a choice. We could either rebuild our marriage on a foundation of actual honesty, or we could divorce and move on with our separate lives. David was willing to rebuild. He was willing to be completely honest, to share every part of himself, to not hide anymore. But he said he needed me to be willing to grow too, to examine my beliefs, to become the kind of person he could actually be himself around. It was the hardest thing I've ever done because it meant admitting that I wasn't the person I thought I was. It meant confronting my biases. It meant changing core beliefs about how I see the world. But I did it. It's been 2 years since that discovery. David and I are still together, but we're not the same people. We're better, more honest, more vulnerable. David is now open about being a therapist. I've learned about his work, and I'm genuinely proud of him. I've also learned a lot from the people he's helped. I've confronted my own biases about gender, sexuality, mental health, and a lot of other things. I'm still not perfect. I still sometimes catch myself making assumptions or judgments, but now I stop and examine them. I ask myself why I think that way. I challenge myself to be better. The weirdest part is that my marriage is actually stronger now than it was before, because it's built on truth instead of pretense. David doesn't have to be the software engineer version of himself anymore. I don't have to pretend to be the perfect marketing director with the perfect life. We're just two flawed people trying to be better. But here's what I need you to understand. I was ready to be the victim in this story. I was ready to paint myself as the betrayed wife, victimized by a cheating husband. And there's a part of me that will always feel betrayed by the lies. But that would have been a comfortable lie. A lie that allowed me to be the good guy. A lie that let me off the hook. The truth is more complicated. The truth is that we were both trapped. He was trapped in a marriage where he couldn't be himself. I was trapped in a version of myself that was incomplete and judgmental. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really think about this. How much of your judgment of other people is actually about them, and how much of it is about you? How much of your criticism of others is actually fear? How much of your intolerance is actually about protecting the version of yourself that you've built? Because here's what I learned. It's easy to judge. It's hard to examine yourself. It's easy to see someone else's flaws. It's hard to see your own. My husband lied to me. That was wrong. But I created an environment where he felt he had to lie. That was also wrong. We both had to change. We both had to be honest. We both had to be vulnerable. And only then could we actually build something real. So when you're sitting in judgment of someone, when you're angry at them for lying or hurting you or disappointing you, ask yourself, did I create the conditions for them to feel like they had to lie? Did I make it impossible for them to be themselves? Did I ask them to be someone other than who they actually are? The answer might be uncomfortable. It was for me. But it might also be the beginning of actually understanding what happened. My marriage was saved not by forgiveness, but by accountability. Both of us taking responsibility for the ways we'd hurt each other. Both of us willing to change. I hope that if you are in a similar situation, you have the courage to do the same. And I hope you share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've handled these kinds of discoveries in your own life. Because the truth is, most of our conflicts aren't black and white. They're complicated, they're messy, and they require more than just anger or forgiveness. They require honesty about ourselves, about each other, about what we're actually afraid of. That's what I learned from my husband's secret phone. And that's the real story.